everyone. Welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of 10 minutes, hopefully, fingers crossed, on me discussing ancient warfare, generally in response to a viewer, reader, or listener question about something that's vexing them about how ancient warfare was conducted. And I will do my best to speculate, stab in the dark, or just guess and rant about it. You can, of course, ask us a question. You can back us on Patreon, one of three levels, Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. You can send me a postcard. You can send an email. You can reply or comment on a previous video or podcast, and it will get to me where I can answer your question, such as this one from Dominik Mueller. Hi there. I've been listening to your podcasts and having an interest on the topic for quite some time now. Thank you for providing your valuable insights. My absolute pleasure. One famous anecdote about ancient warfare is the story of the meeting between Hannibal and Scipio Africanus, and them discussing the greatest generals and strategists of their time and history. My question is this occurrence of this meeting plausible, possible, or even likely? And even if it might not have taken place exactly as recounted by Livy, I'm wondering about the mobility of such elite individuals. Is it plausible to have encountered Scipio at different courts throughout the ancient world? How did individual travel work, and were the elites of the ancient world in constant contact? I hope these questions are comprehensible. I would be happy to receive an answer to this question. Well, I hope you're happy. Here's my attempt at your answer, Dominik. Now, okay, so travel in the ancient world is fascinating and obviously not necessarily a warfare-related question, and more of an ancient history question. And there are, of course, roads and pathways throughout the ancient world to be ridden or marched. And, of course, sailing or rowing is another way of getting between places quickly. But most of it seems to be by foot. And so there is vast amounts of travel occurring. Obviously, the wealthiest classes can afford it. They could probably even be carried in a carriage or in a palanquin, just to use multiple cultures at once. And the other thing is that the intellectual knowledge of one another is a fascinating aspect of warfare. We do have interpreters. For instance, there's quite a lot of evidence that when Caesar is in Gaul and Britain, he has interpreters who speak Latin and the local Gallic Celtic language and interpret for him. Similarly, much later in Roman history, we have Hunnic interpreters and Roman interpreters who speak Hunnic and therefore are able to say what's going on. Earlier, however, what you've got is an intellectual class of commander. And so you've got, probably Hannibal speaks Greek and probably Scipio speaks Greek. So they might not need an interpreter. Maybe Latin. I don't know whether Hannibal would have known Latin. Much more likely he would have known Greek because of the long connections between the Carthaginians and Sicily, who probably spoke more Greek than Latin. So language can be a barrier, but there are generally interpreters. It can also be something where there's a common language that you speak as a way of showing your knowledge. So, travel is possible, and certainly in the later Roman Empire, and even earlier, you've got people traveling to Greece to see, Olympia and various sites of Greece, wanting to hear philosophers, going to Rhodes, hearing philosophers and things like that. You've also got people traveling Pythagoras coming to Italy and things like that. So, or even Plato going to Sicily, so that is definitely happening. And so I think the idea of a wealthy individual traveling, becoming known, is certainly possible. Then you come to these meetings before battles. Now, I think they're probable, that they're certainly doable, that they are, in some cases, even likely. What was said at them, much less knowable. How civilized they were or refined they were, again, is much less knowable. You have multiple ideas of meetings between combatants before battle to, in a peculiar way, discuss the battle ahead. What will happen, we'll meet tomorrow, that sort of thing. But also in multiple times, you've got meetings between commanders in the presence of both of their armies where there is no battle. We often hear of an army coming out in front of their camp and forming up, and the enemy staying in camp and not being willing to offer battle, which, again, probably isn't done in a mute sense. There are going to be heralds who are traveling between armies, offering, yes, we'll take your surrender anytime you're ready. And so the organization of actual commanders meeting to talk is probably not that unusual. Again, most of the modern ideas about these wars is that they are hatred between armies, which is probably less realistic. And again, if you take the Punic Wars, for instance, which your question about Scipio and Hannibal, the idea that there's a civilized, respectful, aristocratic class recognition of commanders talking with one another civilly and then going, right, let's go and kill each other now. That doesn't work. But of course, it does continue. To modern warfare, we don't really have that much sort of idea of it, although social media has kind of taken over that idea that you can have banter between commanders who don't have to meet. But if you go back to even World War II and other wars in the 20th century, exactly that was happening between commanders. They were meeting and talking, or their heralds or, officers were talking. But if you go back to the 19th century, there's these sorts of meetings happening. And all the way back through warfare, there's that kind of aristocratic ruling class discussion of, we may be fighting today, but tomorrow we'll be allies. And you get that in meetings in civil wars in Roman and Greek warfare, where they, not only are they from the same class, they're sometimes from the same family, and they sometimes are married or intermarried. If you look at Demetrius Poliorcetes and Pyrrhus of Epirus, they're brothers-in-law, and then they fight against one another, and amazing connections between them. The Ptolemies, they're brother and sister, Pharaoh and Pharaoh fighting against one another. Anyway, so in that sense, it's certainly possible. And then it comes down to, what do they talk about? Probably there's the business end. Are we going to fight today? No, let's fight tomorrow. It's agreed, then we'll meet at breakfast tomorrow. And of course, a lot of stratagems are about, and he attacked us before breakfast. Or is it a more intellectual, wide-ranging conversation? And so we don't know. Certainly Scipio Africanus, after his victories, becomes, the circle of Scipio Africanus. He surrounds himself with intellectuals and, tours and things like that. So there is an intellectual pursuit of some of these commanders, and they are obviously wanting to be seen as intellectuals. So the discussion when they meet may well have been not all about the business end. It could have been a way of, showing knowledge of various topics as a way of gaining respect, or of just, wasting time or spending time knowing that this is a formality, or this is just a time wastage. We're not going to fight today. Probably you would know going there, I'm not ready to fight for another 3 days, but I'll meet with you today and we'll talk about whatever we talk about. And then we'll, put off fighting a battle. I don't want to tell you that I won't be ready to fight battle in 3 days, because then you might attack me now. So all of that weird positioning and debate is happening, I think. And sometimes we get it recorded in literary sources. I don't know whether we can say for certain that Livy's topic of conversation is what happened. Again, you get the conversation in Herodotus of the Persians discussing the ideal form of government. Very unlikely in an autocratic monarchy that you're going to be putting forward the idea of an oligarchy or of a democracy. It just isn't going to happen. Makes for good literature. And it may have been a topic of conversation, but very hard to say, yes, definitely that's what they talked about. As speeches, these huge long speeches in Thucydides and elsewhere. Really? Is that verbatim? Or was that just the gist? And of course, Thucydides tells us that it may well just be the gist. Anyway, so I think entirely possible in terms of travel, entirely possible in terms of the class of people involved, even from different cultures and different societies being at war with one another. probably more likely in civil war or local conflict where you knew them and, were friends yesterday and not tomorrow. Interpreters make it possible even when language might have been a problem. And in battle or before battle, absolutely possible. What they talked about, we don't know. And I think it recurs in warfare in the medieval period and thereafter. And therefore, I think it's entirely probable that it occurred in the ancient world. I hope that helps, Dominik. Thanks for your question, and join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.